Hello and welcome to Real Hi-Fi Help. Let's have a look at Klipsch speakers, the sound. So I've heard most of the models, just not the ones past year 2018. Generally warm, raw, authentic, good value, lively, mostly good in mid-range and bass. Yeah, it's kind of a general sound that you get from Klipsch, and I think that's part of its charm. They work in a lot of different rooms. When you have a bass that's that low, you get very much of a bobbity boop effect because you get sound waves, hitting the floor a lot easier compared to a lot of other types of speakers. So that's just something you have to be aware of. They travel a lot, the sound waves being bounced off the floors. So that could be good, that could be bad. It just creates a very certain type of flow. Overall, there are a lot of similarities between Klipsch, JBL, and Fenderstein. They all, most times, have very similar American-ish vintage type of sound. Some like that, others don't. But of course, three different brands, three different sounds, of course. But they still have a lot in common. And yeah, it's just that feeling of 1950s traditional vintage time where, you had mono recorded vinyl recordings, that type of sound. And it's just very normal for Klipsch to be big, raw, lively, authentic, down to earth, and giving you this very 1960s type of tube guitar amp sound. So, and I would say that many recordings that you hear on Klipsch speakers sounds like the artist is using a mono microphone instead of stereo. And it's a very distinct type of sound, which of course sometimes in some genres is very fitting. But for me personally, having to listen to that for many, many, many years, not really my kind of thing. But different. It's very different to compared to modern speakers. A lot of modern speakers. Just generally a good brand. A lot of nice energy. And I like the fact that the signal is very short. So just generally a lot of stuff to admire about Klipsch. I feel that it isn't too over filtered like a lot of speakers are. They aren't too numb. That is a very modern thing to do with speakers. Over filter them, make them numb, put them in these small enclosures. So yeah, very interesting. And I feel that it's for people that only use a certain amount of focus on listening to the sound, meaning that it's more about the flow than information and an overall sound instead of bits and pieces that you put together in your head. So I would say not a good or a bad thing, just a nice old style authentic sound. It has the very resounding type of flow where you, for example, hear a guitar and then it quickly snaps from being in the foreground, half focused on, to getting suddenly like 300% more twangy effect. And that's a very Klipsch-like thing. It's also a very much a Fenderstein type of thing. Like when you're listening to an electric guitar, they also do that type of sound. And I've also heard that on JBL sometimes. And modern speakers don't really do that. They usually are a lot more normalized and into specifics. So it's kind of a horn type of sound that you get. And I would say that the efficiency of the speakers in general just opens a lot of doors for people. Simply being able to use all kinds of gear that typically wouldn't sound so good on a lot of traditional speakers that are a lot heavier to drive. So you can use a lot of lower end gear on Klipsch, and I know that even lower end turntables sound pretty decent on Klipsch. And personally, if I had a set of Klipsch, I wouldn't live in a modern flat and then have streaming or really cheap CD player connected to Klipsch. I feel that kind of ruins the whole sound. It works, but it doesn't really tune into the Klipsch quality. So I feel that if you have Klipsch, just have like a basic rear, basic vintage amp, basic turntable, and then you're fine. It's then you're more in tune with what Klipsch really wanted to create. And just letting you guys know about that, because if you're listening to a lot of modern tracks in a modern apartment on a modern low end streamer, I feel that it's a bit like going to a fine restaurant and then whipping out your Big Mac that you just bought from over the street at McDonald's. It's a bit like it's a bit blasphemous in a way, but some people still like it. So that's just my take on it. So they can on some systems sound either boosted, closed in, harsh, shouty, or basic soundbox like characteristics. It also depends on what mark version you have of the Cornwall, the La Scala, the Heresy. They have changed throughout the years, and I like what they've done. I haven't heard the latest versions of them, but I like the way that they have evolved through time, and I still like the original models, but probably prefer the newer models. I think they're technically more sophisticated, more evolved, the newer models, where the older ones were just a bit more raw, flat, harsh, and simple, but still good in their own way. And I feel that you kind of need vintage gear when we're talking about Klipsch. Having a low end modern cheap amp on a Klipsch, yeah, it works, but I don't know, you just Klipsch has a vintage sound. You really want a vintage amp on it to kind of bring out the best qualities. And again, you don't really want to do a hell of a lot with your cables, with your power cleaner and stuff like that. You almost want to not use a power cleaner when it's Klipsch. And you definitely want to stay away from, over detailed silver cables when you're dealing with Klipsch, because it just doesn't really fit. So I wouldn't do a hell of a lot with cables. I would just use a basic vintage Macintosh, a Pioneer amp that's 50, 60 years old, something like that, and use it on a Klipsch with some basic turntable, and yeah, that's a pretty decent sound. To me, Klipsch is a bit locked into certain types of music, making it a sort of a religion type of speaker. But then you have to kind of ask yourself, is that really a problem? Because I feel that many people that buy them are anyway going to listen to a lot of rock and other categories like country or jazz or blues, which is very Klipsch-like. So it kind of takes care of that, and I would say that if you're the type of person that's really into digging deep into recordings and having a lot of gears from like the mid bass to the lowest possible bass. And you get like a really low hertz. I just feel like Klipsch doesn't really deliver on that. Again, a very horn-like type of quality, where you're just not really... It's a funny thing, when you're dealing with really efficient speakers, you're just generally not really pulling a proper heaviness out of the speaker. You know, like you're really pulling it up, and then you're getting the layers like do 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 do. You know, so you get this sort of rock tight like effect. You just don't get that with very efficient speakers generally. It is possible to achieve that, but it's very hard on Klipsch getting that right. So yeah, it's kind of one of the big problems I have with efficient speakers generally, that they can't do that. And you know, if I want to go over to the dark side, to speakers that I don't really like Wilson audio speakers, at least they are, superb in that particular isolated detail, where you get this isolated bass and you get so many layers in it, and it's so deep and it's so heavy and it's so tight. Klipsch don't have that at all. They just have big quantity of bass, and that's kind of a general problem with actually a lot of efficient speakers. So it's not just the speaker in itself, it's the combination of speaker and amp that you put on the Klipsch that of course creates that sound, but it is almost impossible getting that lowest end depth and weight to the sound. And that's kind of what I want to say, the true like grunt and weight to the sound, it just really isn't quite there. It's a lot of bass, but it just isn't quite there. And if you're into a lot of micro detail, bandwidth, ultra top end, and like a crazy good structure and great black levels, you just don't get that from Klipsch. It's just not that type of sound. And if you want stuff like that, then we have to look at, monitor audio, Canton speakers. Those are relatively cheap, but still do that on a very high level. Of course, Wilson Audio, which is in a crazy price class, and Martin Design and those speakers I usually mention, with the newest membrane technology, they're good at that type of thing, and Klipsch just isn't quite good at that. I also want to mention that speakers like Fenderstein are usually heavier to drive than Klipsch, but have a very similar sound. And me personally, I kind of like the more heavy Fenderstein sound that stresses the amp more, with that type of time delay. I like that. I kind of prefer that a bit more, but still they are very similar. And but I do recognize that not many amps are strong enough to drive the Fenderstein speakers. We're talking about 1CI, 2CE, I think it's called 3A or whatever. And they're impractical, Fenderstein speakers, because of their positioning. You need them, very tight up against the back and the sidewalls. So, but I also feel that Fenderstein just gives more value than Klipsch. And it's not because Klipsch doesn't give you a lot of value. It does really generally give you a lot of value compared to the market. So the Klipsch are they're just kind of flipped a bit, compared to the Fenderstein. Very similar sound, but practically very different. Also with the terminals at the back, Klipsch made it easy, Fenderstein made it difficult. So I kind of prefer the Klipsch in that aspect, and also that you can play louder, and you just have a lot of fun when you're able to crank up the volume, and the amp doesn't have to stress too much. and you don't really need. I constantly talk about it, but you don't really need inner walls with Klipsch, because they're very boxy. So that kind of takes care of that. Where with Fenderstein, you kind of need them because they often lack a bit of pressure, because they have a half open cabinet type of thing. So, interesting, interesting. And I don't know if I mentioned this, but it's just nice having a speaker where you can have a lot of air around it while it not being too stressed, and that's what a really good thing about Klipsch. Not a lot of speakers can do that. And but if you're into the purest sound, the most analytical sound, without it being tainted in a certain type of rendition, then I would probably suggest a more modern brand, because Klipsch is very much a 1950s box type of sound, which is cool, but it just feels a bit boosted and generalized for me. And just on modern tracks, it just doesn't really sound convincing enough. I feel that if you want to play modern tracks on a Klipsch while it still is authentic enough, you actually have to use vintage gear and just kind of stay true to the Klipsch sound, because modern modern gear, modern sound on a Klipsch just has a tendency of being very vague and weird and just not quite fitting in sound. So I would suggest, if you want to listen to modern music, get it on vinyl, put it on a turntable, have a vintage amp, have a nice charming rear with a clip speaker, probably tube, I would say. But yeah, it has this sort of romanticized through the fog type of obscurity Klipsch, which is charming. A lot of people buy them because of that. So I'm not saying that as a bad thing, not at all, because they actually do it at a pretty high level. But again, like I've written down here, if you have a not so optimal setup and you're putting like a halfback quality CD on, and it's got a bit of a girly pop type of 1980s sound, it just quickly loses its appeal on Klipsch, and just generally a lot of speakers in the world. A lot of speakers just can't do that without it being weird and awkward. And again, random classical modern half-bad quality CD, again, doesn't really sound very good on Klipsch, but again, does it really sound good on a lot of other stuff in the world? I also don't think it sounds good on a lot of other stuff in the world, but I'm just saying these two type of recordings especially are like a big Achilles heel in the sound. So if you want to listen to a lot of girly pop on streaming on a very not so good amp and not so good whatever setup that you've put up, I wouldn't recommend it on Klipsch. So I would just stay more traditional with Klipsch to kind of tune into that Klipsch sound. And again, this bobbity boop type of bass, which is a bit bongo like, and it's sort of a universal rule of physics, where when we're entering this around this 100 dB efficiency speaker sound on this level, it just for me personally, I don't like that, because I like to hear the cemented bass going down in layers. I don't like this big quantity of bass, and I feel that that's just very Klipsch like. So some people like that, other people don't. So I'm not saying that's good or bad, so you just judge for yourself. Um, and yeah, they have a tight bass Klipsch. They do, but still put on Pepe Romero and Anonymous Farrakis. It's on YouTube, by the way. Just try and put that on. Put that on a Klipsch, and then you'll hear how it loses its grip very easily. And that's even though it's a very efficient speaker. And good, is that good or bad? I mean, for me, I don't like that so much, but um, uh, I mean, it's just a very nice flowing speaker, and you just don't get that precision and that cemented sound that goes deep, you know, and has that true grunt. I mean, it has a lot of grunt, Klipsch. It does have a lot of grunt, but not that really deep, true, like, yeah, you know. It's more of a let's get up and party. This is fun. It's like, yeah, this is cool, but it doesn't have that last bit of conviction, you know. And you can hear that. Listen to this track on Klipsch. Then you can hear how it's falling over its own steps, and it doesn't do that with speakers like Canton, Martin Design, Monitor Audio, Wilson Audio speakers that I'm not so crazy about. These speakers easily do that track 5 to 10 times better, easily. A lot of modern speakers are pretty good at this type of detail. But again, I'm just saying that as a sort of guide so you know what you want and you're getting whatever speaker you prefer. So it is what it is, you know. It's very true to its own sound. It doesn't try to be something it isn't, which a lot of modern speakers in the lower end try to do. You know, they try to cover a very general, broad taste of music, and they fail a lot of times doing that. And I feel that Klipsch doesn't really do that. They kind of stick to their thing that they're good at. So that is good, you know. I like that, you know. I like that they did that. So yeah, if you had a speaker that was more neutral, analytical, evolved, and less safe than this, then you would have more potential. But also, you would probably also, you know, also have the potential of making it go a bit more wrong than on a Klipsch. So I feel that the Klipsch sound kind of saves itself because it keeps it in this sort of safe, nice, fun zone. So not necessarily a good or bad thing, just telling you guys, that's how I hear it. So conclusion, worth a try, very interesting. And yeah, I actually do recommend Klipsch, that you own a set of Klipsch speakers in your life to try that experience, because it's a very authentic American type of sound that you just need to hear at some point in your life. So yeah, give it a try. It's a very charming sound. So this is me logging off. Have a nice day. Bye.